Everyone, and welcome to another episode of Shaman's Way. As always, I'm joined by Cricket. How are you doing today, Cricket?
I am doing well. It's a rainy day. It's luscious to see rain in the sky. I'm happy.
Excellent. And today you've got a upper world journey for us, or a podcast about upper world.
We absolutely do. Yeah. One of the things I noticed is that we've discussed the role of shamanism. We've discussed perception in the shamanic world. We've discussed the medicine wheel. We haven't really talked a lot about journey work.
Absolutely.
And we haven't really talked about some of the divisions that we use normally in North American shamanism of the division of the three worlds.
So this episode we're doing upper world, next one we're doing lower world.
Absolutely, and then we'll discuss in a delicious one on some of the dangers, I think, of working within the middle world and some of the perfunctory fun things that happen in the middle world as well.
Sounds good.
Right.
I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much. So what is the upper world? When I was first introduced to shamanism so many years ago, it doesn't really bother to count it. When I was introduced to it, there was a very strong distinction between the worlds. There was the lower world. This is where we travel to find our power animals and our healings and the answers to some of those questions. Then the middle world, as it was explained to me, was this world only removed from time and space. And I can honestly say that at the age of 24, with little spiritual practice other than Christian mythology, I can guarantee that statement made absolutely no sense to me on one level and a lot of sense on another level. The last world that we would generally travel to was the upper world. And the upper world is where you would meet your teachers or your guides. Today I want to share some of my understanding of what the upper world is and maybe give a brief introduction as to the splitting of the world into three. It's a Finnish tradition to split the world into three, and because my primary form of shamanism is Finnish, it makes sense to me that there is a tripartite world that we extend our spiritual relationship to. When I took the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, their workshops, they were very clear that there were three very distinct worlds: the lower world, the middle world, and the upper world. And it was my understanding, based on those rudimentary teachings of shamanism, that I was able to become introduced to the aspects of the upper world, the lower world, and the middle world. When we have a reality that is split into different places, one of the really important parts of traveling between the worlds was and is still the threshold experience. So when you are traveling into the lower world, you travel through a threshold, and that threshold can look like anything. It can look like a hollowed out tree trunk. It can look like a gopher hole. It can look like an underground pedestrian walk. I don't know what your journey into the lower world looks like, but it is a process of leaving the mundane world and entering into the sacred world. It is no different when we enter the upper world from the mundane world and move into what is truly considered to be a very intensely spirit world. I'm going to backtrack just for a moment, and I'm going to give some of my thoughts on the overculture that we live within in North America. The overculture is predominantly, or has been predominantly, Christian. And the overculture with the Christian mythology has taught us that God is out there. Spirit is out there. It is away from us. It is up from us. It is out of our reach. There are many traditions that place the gods and the goddesses in the skies and place them above, outside, and not in relationship to each individual human. I think that has been an aspect of us and our collective mythology probably since the beginning of time, or maybe the beginning of the evolution of consciousness. In the evolution of consciousness, there usually was a person within a tribe, within a group, who was chosen for whatever reason to speak and to work as a mediator between the world of the human and the world of the spirits. And in that relationship, they didn't necessarily believe, that there was specifically a separation, but rather a negotiator or a communicator. When we don't have a communicator, what we do have is someone that interprets the world of the spirits for the average population. And in the beginning, the interpreter would be the shaman or the curandero or the maestro, whatever the term, the sangoma, whatever the term was for the individuals within that particular culture. As an interpreter for the culture, the role of I'm just going to use the word shaman for now, because if I listed off all of the traditions, it would take an awfully long podcast. So the shaman then would be the mediator, would travel to the other worlds and bring back sacred information, bring back sacred knowledge, bring back the location of animals, whatever the role of that particular shaman was. What was understood was, in their mythology, there was a time when the world of the spirit and the world of the human communicated freely. There was a time when the world of the animals communicated freely with the world of the humans. There was a time, you see where I'm going? There was a time. And during that time, there was no need for a communicator, for every single aspect of the world was able to communicate with every other aspect of the world. You see the story? You've heard the story. So what happened? What happened was some tragedy. Each culture, each myth, each origin, each cosmology has their own insufferable or unforgivable aspect, behavior that separated the world of the human from the world of the spirit. And as a result, as the stories go, there was always born one or born a family that was specifically born to communicate with the world of the spirits. They moved through the thresholds and shoot thousands and thousands and thousands of years later into what was their future. And here I am standing in front of this microphone recording this for you, saying that an aspect of that tradition still exists. It still exists, but what has changed so dramatically is that the world of the spirits and the world of the humans is no longer as separated as it was in traditional cultures. We now, because we don't have rules and roles, which is a whole other podcast altogether, we now have the ability as an individual to journey through these places, gather our own information, and interpret it for ourselves. So that's where we've come from, and this is where we are today. In relationship to that, we have what is referred to as thresholds and barriers and sacred places, anchor spots. The reason we have thresholds is because it is a motion, a movement, a understanding, a conscious understanding that we have stepped from the mundane world into the spiritual world. When I first started doing my journey work, the way that I would travel to the upper world is I would jump onto fire and I would be carried up into the upper world on smoke. It was really impressed upon me that the way that you knew you had traveled between the worlds was that you would break through a barrier. I don't know how many of you know what it looks like to have chocolate pudding in your fridge that hasn't had plastic covered on it. It's a couple of days old, so it's got those cracks in it, and you know that if you eat that top layer of that pudding, it's going to stick to the roof of your mouth. And I'm certain that each one of you are going, wow, that sounds like super yummy, but I bet that that's not the case. That is what I broke through every single time I went into the upper world, was a layer that looked like that. And as a woman who's allergic to chocolate, breaking through a layer did have a psychological impact on me. When I'm breaking through chocolate, I'm breaking the mundane world and nothing can harm me, and I'm up in the upper world. I thought it was really a very clever trick on Spirit's part, and it took me a couple of years to put two and two together, sometimes because I'm really not always that bright. However, in the upper world, I have heard so many different types of relationships to Spirit. I have had many Buddhist practitioners in the circles over the years, and many have reported back that they have had a relationship with Buddha in the upper world. I know that there are Christians who meet Mother Mary or Jesus or the face of God in their own journeys to the upper world. When I first started journeying to the upper world, I met a spirit that became a traveling companion, that became a lover, that became a very integral part of my experiences in the upper world. We traveled everywhere together, and I experienced so many wonderful landscapes. When I talk to individuals or people who have journeyed or report back what their experiences have been, what's fascinating is that there are so many versions of the upper world. It's astounding. Some people work in these amazing crystal castles. That would be just beautiful. And some of them describe how iridescent they are. Some people talk about going into the Summerlands and being able to create and meet their ancestors or their beloved ones that have passed, and so on and so forth. Other people talk about going to the moon or to Mars or to Saturn or traveling even out beyond. And still in the upper world, there are those who travel further and further and further up and beyond into what is referred to as the void, that place of perfect nothingness, that place where we all began. There are many levels to the upper world, same as there are many layers to the lower world. If we look at what a tetrahedron looks like, that would be very close to what I envision the spirit world to look like, the three worlds, only far more multiplied in layers and levels. Once my relationship with the spirit in the upper world, whose name was Ayushanu, changed, and Ayushanu left to pursue some other aspect of spirit work, devastated me. However, then I traveled a lot more on my own. Shortly after the bombings of the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the flight in 2001, when I was doing a series of journeys to check out the dead spirits that had been left, find out what some of the future was going to be, I was introduced to a winged horse. I don't refer to that winged horse as Pegasus. However, if your pantheon or your belief structure is that a winged horse is named Pegasus, then by all means you can apply that name to the flying horse. But for me, it's the white horse. I have a black horse that travels with me through the lower world, and I have a white horse with wings that takes me through the upper world. These are not my power animals at all. They are my helpers, they are my guides, they are my advisors, but they are not my power animals. There's a very distinct difference for me, but I won't get into that at this point. In the upper world, you are capable of looking over, around, and through things in a different manner than you could in the lower world. The upper world obviously has the advantage of height, and from height, as any eagle will share with you, any hawk will share with you, any condor will share with you, height is a view and a change in perception that we often don't have. Upper world teachers also can be incredibly mystical and can have the wisdom of Brahma. They can have the wisdom of Siddhartha, Buddha, and they can have the wisdom untold. In many times, in many traditions, in that collective unconscious of the upper world, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of priests and priestesses who have sent their prayers to the heavens or to the upper worlds. And as a result, with the collective awareness or the collective conscious, have created beings that represent certain aspects of the spirit world in recognizable forms. Put in plain English, if it's thought about, it's created. If it's created, you can meet it. If it's Ganesha you're looking for and you're traveling through the upper worlds, you might meet his mother, you might meet his father, you might even meet the head or the elephant that offered his head for Ganesha to continue to live. That's one being that would be in the upper world. The upper world is also a place where I go to retrieve pieces or aspects of souls, if I'm doing soul retrieval work, that may not have entered into the middle world and entered into the place of birth. I like the upper world as a way of traveling very fast, and it gets me from one place to another in the form of light. So what am I trying to say about the upper world? Because I've shared some of my own stories and some of my own visions. The upper world is an essential part of your spiritual journey. The reason it's an essential part of your spiritual being and your spiritual journey is because it gives you an alternative viewpoint. What we want to strive to do in shamanism is we want to strive to change our viewpoints. And in changing our viewpoints, we change how we perceive the world around us. If we can change how we perceive the world around us, then the world changes how it perceives us. We are on a journey to understand our own consciousness in a better form. We're better to understand our consciousness and some of our elated ideals if we don't travel to the places that we have held in ancestry, in mythology, in cosmology, the places, the home of the spirits who live above and beyond us. So we come back to the very beginning, that overculture and the culture of other stories, that the spirits are out there, the spirits are up there, and it's true. But what isn't also true is that each individual has the ability, using drums or using rattles or using meditation, the didgeridoo, whatever your form of movement through the world is, to travel up, over, and beyond in order to ask questions for your own self and receive answers for your own self so that you are cosmically awakened and aware in this world. And that's one of the aspects of doing journey work in the upper world, is finding out answers to really funky questions. The challenge is to bring those lofty ideas and those lofty ideals back down to earth and work with it in your own life. So when we're in the upper world, I encourage students, especially new students, to ask how can they implement and integrate those aspects of themselves into their day-to-day life. With upper world work, you might get some really interesting examples. For me, it was to pay attention to the moons and what the moons do in relationship to plants. And in my observations, I realized that at the new moon, the bees traveled around the plants far more than they did on the full moon. And it was in understanding that in the full moon, the plants fill up with more fluid or more liquid. And during the new moon, they are filled with less liquid, creating more nitrogen and more carbohydrates, which in turn creates the scent and creates the nectar for the flowers. So if I had not listened to my upper world teacher and paid attention to the division of the moons and the activity of the bees, I never would have noticed that. If I hadn't paid attention to the acknowledgement or the ideas of the upper world, I wouldn't know that there are plants that grow during the day and plants that grow during the night. So tobacco grows during the day, which is an offering to the medicine wheel, and corn grows during the night. So it is also an offering in the medicine wheel. And they are different offerings, not only because they are associated with different places on the medicine wheel, but they're different because they grow under different influences. I know in the upper world, we often have a relationship with astrology. Astrology comes from the upper world, from the constellations, from the myths and the stories about the constellations. The upper world affects astronomy. What are those planets moving? What are the planets doing? So the upper world does infiltrate our life. The upper world is being explored with Hubble telescopes, with many different types of satellites orbiting the Earth, many long-term and long-functioning satellites which collect sounds and visions and creations within the depths of very darkness. So as we expand our consciousness, to expand our understanding of the world around us, in turn, it helps those of us who practice in the spiritual world. Oftentimes, we have our thoughts or ideas of planets vindicated by information that scientists pick up. And we have stories from the old shamans. This is one that I remember from Mexico. And the person who was trying to explain to the old-timers in a village in Mexico that didn't even have running water, or in the sense that we have, and they certainly didn't have electricity. And this woman was trying to explain to the grandfathers and the grandmothers all about the moon, and that they put something on the moon, and this woman had to describe what a space shuttle was, because they had no idea what a space shuttle was. So she said, okay, well, you take a cooking pot. And the aunts and the grandmothers and grandfathers, oh, okay, now we understand. We have a cooking pot. And she goes, yeah. And you take lots of fuel, lots of things that make the cooking pot go. Oh, okay, yes, we understand. And then you light that pot, and that pot goes flying through the air, because she had to use the language. Like, oh, that would be such an amazing experience. Can you imagine that flying through the air like that? When they were all excited. And so she says, yeah, and they got to the moon, and the moon was really dusty. And an old guy in the back goes, I've been to the moon lots of times. It's a really dusty place, and the rocks, they crumble in your hands. And it was hilarious, because that is what the astronauts had also experienced. And here we go again, in that we have these quote-unquote limitations, and yet in the spirit world, there are no limitations. You can go to the moon, and you can find out that it's really dusty, and you can go to Mars, and you can see whatever it is you want to see, if that's where you want to go. And I really like to stand on the moon, and one of my favorite things to do when I'm in the upper world is to put myself into a ball like a speeding bullet and jump off the moon and go through the Earth's atmosphere and come crashing down onto Earth. It's got to be one of the most exhilarating experiences I can honestly have. And when I skydive, I'm sure it'll seem slow in relation to diving off the moon from the upper world into the middle world. So, in last part to this, I want to bring it all back to, what does that mean for you as a practitioner? And what if you are doing healing work? Well, you're one of the places that you're going to go if you are going to talk to the spirit of addiction, say, or if you're going to talk to the spirit of cancer. Those are journeys that you will generally have to do within the middle world if you're doing ancestor work to find out whether or not somebody has cancer within their family, backaches in their family, knee aches in their family. You'll likely want to do that in the middle world. However, if we're looking for the overreaching spiritual reality of what this is when we journey into the upper world. We journey into the upper world to have the overall view, the overall image, the overall effect. And we are then able to take a many-pronged approach to physical health, spiritual health, emotional health, intellectual health. We have a system in place brought to us by generations of spirits, brought to us by the people around us today, encouraging us to find applications. As a practitioner as well, if you're attempting to find out a relationship between the stars and between the earth, then I would travel up into the stars and I would ask to speak to the spirit of the moon, or speak to the stars who are your brothers and sisters, or have an audience with the god or the goddess of the sun, or the god or the goddess of the moon, whatever your teaching is. And in doing so, understand and increase your vocabulary about how the world really does function. It is invaluable to have another set of eyes looking with you, for you, and out for you as we do this earth walk that we are on. So that's my thoughts on the upper world. Back to you, Doug.
All right, thank you for all that, Cricket. One quick question I had is when you talk about traveling to the moon and to Mars and such, I almost consider that a middle world destination because it's physical, it's tangible. It kind of feels like it's a little more here and now. So how do you differentiate between that aspect of the moon and travel versus when you're talking about the upper world?
I love that question. I think that's a great question. Thank you, Doug. And what I'd have to say is that there's a difference between the physical and then the overlaid spiritual aspect of it. If we are journeying to the moon in order to get a better vantage point or to get a better view of something, then that, I think, yeah, absolutely. You're in the middle world. You're working with the tangible. You're working with the visible. You're working with this world. But then we have to apply outside of time and space. So when we're working in the middle world, we're working outside of time and space. However, I also think if we're working with the sun or the moon, then we also work with the deities that are associated with it. And those deities aren't the rock. Those deities are the overreaching essence or overreaching personality or overreaching spiritual acumos, for lack of a better word, of that particular body of celestial body that we're looking at. For instance, I would like to do at some point a discussion on the sun goddesses and the moon gods, where that's quite different from what we talk about in our world, as we have Father Sun and Grandmother Moon. So we have that difference. So that, I think your question is a great one. I think it really is splitting hairs, to be honest. It's splitting hairs.
It almost sounds like moon with a small m versus moon with a capital M.
Exactly, right? Jung and the small self, capital S, and the large self, capital S, right? Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
Okay.
I guess we'll wrap it up there.
Wrap it up there.
All right, thank you everyone again for listening. We will link in our show notes to some information on upper world journeys as well as recommended first ones for new folks. We've even got a recorded meditation for you if you're not getting up there with just the drumming track and such. So all that's available at shamansway.net. And if you go shamansway.net/podcast, you should find that all in the show notes.
Perfect.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
If you're enjoying the Shaman's Way podcast and or the resources over at shamansway.net, and you would think others would benefit from listening to it or finding these things, or you'd simply want to send a little good karma our way, we would love it, love it, love it if you would head on over to iTunes and leave a rating and a comment. That's the biggest way you can show us your support. A big thank you to those who already have. We really do appreciate it. Thanks again to everyone for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again in a couple of weeks. Cheers.